Hey guys, tonight we drift beneath a warm Egyptian night where the desert exhales the heat it hoarded all day and the stars scatter like crushed pearls across the sky. You're lying flat on your back in the fine sand outside the city of Memphis, not the one in Tennessee, the original one. The wind is still, except for the occasional flutter of linen robes from passing priests. And above it all, Venus gleams. Bright, relentless, unmistakable. It's so luminous, it's almost annoying. Like the cosmos installed a nightlight directly into your forehead. Somewhere in the dark, a jackal howls once, then goes back to whatever jackals do. You squint upward and think, that's just a planet, right? But here's the catch. Ancient Egyptians didn't exactly think of it that way. They had gods for everything. Crops, cats, crocodiles, you name it, there was a deity managing it. So when Venus started shining like it owned the place, they didn't call it a planet. They called it a visitor, a god, a glowing, wandering guest who just dropped by for who knows what. You probably won't survive this night, historically speaking. You're not going to die. Don't panic, but you are going to get utterly buried in ritual cosmic guesswork and a truly absurd amount of incense. There's no Wi-Fi. The pyramids are still young, and you're about to see how a simple dot of light convinced an entire civilization to rearrange its beliefs, calendars, and even its royal decisions. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I really appreciate it. And hey, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is there. Bonus points if Venus is actually visible in your sky right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge through the outer district of Memphis, where huts cluster like sleepy goats around larger stone structures. The Nile murmurs nearby, lazy and wide, catching bits of starlight like silver fish scales. Above, the sky stretches so vast you feel like a crumb on the edge of a dinner plate. Then you see it again. Venus, low in the sky, not twinkling like the others, but burning steady. A little too steady. The priests have noticed it too. They're murmuring now. One of them drops a bundle of reeds and stares upward like he just saw someone sneeze in the temple of Thoth, which in this culture is a big deal. You edge closer to the temple's outer walls. There, you find a little group of novice astronomer priests huddled around a shallow bronze dish filled with oil. The surface reflects the stars, and one nervous young man is poking at it with a stick like it's a horoscope soup. Third night in a row, he mutters, still in the wrong house of Hathor. You don't have the heart to tell him it's not in any house. It's in orbit. But they wouldn't know that. Not yet. To them, Venus is an unpredictable guest, sometimes rising in the morning, sometimes appearing after sunset, always moving backward, forward, or hiding entirely. It's like it has no manners. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians truly believed Venus was a god or merely a messenger of one. But standing here, watching a group of grown men debate whether the Yitar bright wanderer signals good crops or divine punishment, it's clear they're not just stargazing for fun. You hear a name passed around? Sopadet. She's a goddess of the star Sirius, but tonight, someone suggests, half jokingly, that maybe she got demoted and Venus has taken her place. The others hiss and cross their arms in protection. Bad luck, bad vibes. Never joke about star politics, and it's not just superstition. These stars are part of a massive cosmic order. Egypt's whole religious and agricultural calendar dances to their rhythms. If Venus is out of step, well, so is everything else. The air smells faintly of frankincense and goat. A servant trudges by with a basket of dates, and you grab one, chewy, sweet, with that weird gritty skin. You watch the city settle for the night. Torches flicker on rooftops. Somewhere, a harp plinks a slow lullaby. But in the temples, no one's sleeping. The high priests are up on the roof again, whispering in alarm. You climb the crumbling outer stairway behind them, careful not to disturb the bats fluttering out of the cracks. At the top, the view stretches in every direction. Black sands, distant flickers of torchlight, and above, that absurdly bright dot. "We must inform the pharaoh," says a voice behind you. It's not an overreaction. The pharaoh, after all, is basically a god himself, or at least the middle manager between humans and the divine. If one of the celestial VIPs is misbehaving, he's the one who gets the performance review. But you sigh. You already know how this will go. There'll be a ceremony, an offering, probably something involving cows or scented oils. Maybe a new wall carving declaring that Venus is smiling upon the land, which, spoiler, she absolutely is not. Still, you can't help but feel a little awe. No electric lights, no pollution, just you, the sky, and the crisp, bone-deep silence of a civilization that's trying to read divine intentions from tiny moving specks. In some ways, they're hopelessly wrong. In others, weirdly close. They knew Venus moved in a pattern. They knew it came and went. What they didn't know was what it really was. But for tonight, you stay silent. You wrap a linen shawl tighter around your shoulders, lean against a sun-warmed stone pillar, and let your eyes drift upward again. It really is stupidly bright. The next morning, you wake to the smell of warm bread and distant chanting. Memphis stirs early, even before the sun crests the horizon. You stretch out your limbs with a faint crunch of joints. You definitely weren't made for sleeping on sandstone. But no matter. The real show is upstairs again. Venus hasn't moved much, but the people who track it have been busy. You follow the soft shuffling of sandals through the temple's inner corridors. The stone underfoot is cool and worn smooth by centuries of barefoot priests pacing in thought. At the far end of the hall, past rows of lotus-topped columns and a very pushy cat with deity-level attitude, a door creaks open. Inside, it's dim and thick with smoke, but you make out several priests hunched over a massive table carved with circles, lines, and tiny star shapes. Papyrus scrolls litter the surface like homework after a long week of denial. Some are precise star maps, others look like dreamy doodles, but every one of them has something in common. Venus, or rather, the wanderer with no home. That's what they've started calling it, and honestly, it's kind of poetic. 26 days, one priest mutters, then gone for 9, then returns, opposite side. Another priest frowns and adjusts his headband. It must mean something. You lean in as they sketch it out. These aren't just idle star fans. They're temple astronomers. Yes, Egypt had those. They were responsible not only for timekeeping in calendars, but also for decoding divine will through the heavens. To the average person, the stars were pretty but distant. To these guys, it was a full-time job with overtime and no dental. They're charting Venus's cycle now, not with telescopes. Those are still a few thousand years off, but with naked eyes, memory, and a whole lot of guesswork. One of them uses a knotted cord to measure positions. Primitive, but oddly effective. You notice a pattern they haven't caught yet. Venus isn't just wandering, it's looping, coming back almost to where it started every 8 years. But you keep that to yourself. No need to upstage someone with a golden ibis pin. Mainstream history often highlights Mesopotamians as the first great astronomers, and fair. But don't sleep on the Egyptians. Their knowledge was just as rich, albeit more wrapped in religion. They didn't just want to understand the stars, they wanted to speak to them. And that's what the papyrus charts really are: conversations, messages sent into the void. The scribes are trying to track Venus, not just to map it, but to appease it, understand it, maybe even flatter it. One of them rolls out a new scroll, an elaborate calendar divided by lunar months and agricultural seasons. You spot a set of glyphs clustered around the day when Venus disappeared from view last year. A fish, a lotus, an eye. You think it was a warning? The youngest priest asks. Or a blessing? Another counters. Historians still argue whether these markings were purely astronomical or symbolic. Some claim they represent practical observations, planting cues, flood warnings, solar events. Others insist they're metaphors wrapped in myth. Either way, this scroll looks suspiciously like a cosmic mood board. Suddenly there's movement behind you. A higher-ranking priest enters, trailing a cloud of cinnamon-scented incense and ego. His beard is oiled, his robe sparkles. He's holding a palm-sized object, curved, polished, and marked with tiny dots. An astrolabe, sort of, more like a celestial pointer. He raises it dramatically toward the rafters, then slowly aligns it with a hole carved high in the temple ceiling. Light spills through the hole at a precise angle, hitting the center of the charted table, directly on Venus's last known position. Boom! Mic drop, ancient style. The younger priests murmur in reverence. The older ones nod like they knew it all along. You just admire the theater of it, because if there's one thing the ancient Egyptians knew how to do, it was make data look divine. After the demonstration, the room empties for midday prayers. You linger, running your fingers lightly across the papyrus. The ink is thick and slightly raised. The scent of black soot, honeycomb, and reeds lingers faintly. A few drops of melted wax mark one corner, likely from a late-night oil lamp vigil. You turn to leave, only to find one last scroll tucked into the shadows. This one's different. The lines are jagged, the drawings frantic, a scribbled diagram of Venus darting across the sky, paired with symbols for drought and animal disease. Someone wasn't just tracking Venus. They were blaming it. It seems not everyone agreed Venus was friendly. Fringe theory? Maybe. But it suggests something deeper. That celestial observations in ancient Egypt weren't universally accepted. Just like now, they had debates, different schools of thought. One priest might see a blessing, another a curse. And without a telescope or astrophysics degree, the sky was anyone's guess. You step out into the courtyard again. It's brighter now, hot. The limestone blazes underfoot. A group of children chases a goat through the temple shadows, laughing. Life goes on, even as the stars spark holy debates above. You look up once more. Venus is gone now, vanished in the daylight haze. But you know exactly where it would be. Just behind the sun. The next evening, the air over Memphis feels heavier, thicker, as if the night itself is holding its breath. You stroll through the marketplace just as it's shutting down. passing baskets of leftover figs, half-haggled linen, and a man muttering about someone shortchanging him on barley. But no one is looking down anymore. All eyes are tilted upward, wide and unsettled. Venus is back, and brighter than ever. You find yourself drifting along with the crowd as it moves toward the temple of Ptah. The priests are already assembling. Their robes shimmer with gold-threaded hems, and one particularly theatrical fellow is carrying a palm branch like it's a divine antenna. People murmur to each other, some in awe, some in worry, because when something in the sky glows that unnaturally bright, you don't think, oh cool, a planet. You think, which god just showed up? Here's the fun part. Ancient Egyptians didn't just look up and assign names. They believed some lights were gods. Stars like Sirius were living, conscious beings. And when Venus flared up in the twilight, outshining even Sirius, they weren't just identifying it. They were bracing for it. Tonight, that brightness means something's coming. A sign, a message, or possibly a divine audit. The priests gather under the temple's open sky atrium, holding their ceremonial wands, carved with symbols so old even they pretend to remember what half of them mean. You edge closer, the crowd hushes, and one priest raises both hands. Behold, he says, Sekhmet walks among the stars. Ah, right, Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of war, plagues, and righteous judgment. Exactly who you don't want to associate with a bright celestial visitor. But when something that burns in the sky refuses to act normal, it tends to get linked with the scarier deities. It's cosmic guilt by association. This is the moment Venus cements her place in the Egyptian pantheon, not as a simple star, not even just a symbol, but as a god made visible. They might have called her the Eye of Hathor or linked her to Isis. Sometimes she's a gentle morning light, other times a fierce evening fire. It depends on her mood, and her mood, as far as these priests are concerned, is not great. Historians still argue whether the Egyptian identification of Venus with different goddesses was systematic or just poetic improvisation. What's clear is that Venus wasn't a one-trick deity. She was whoever she needed to be, an astral shapeshifter with a flair for drama. One of the fringe texts, an obscure piece of myth scribble from a temple in Dendera, claims that Venus arrived unexpectedly one year, shimmering into the evening sky weeks ahead of schedule. The priests declared it a rebuke from the heavens. Apparently, the Nile had flooded too soon, and they were grasping at cosmic explanations. The solution? Declare that a god had come early to warn them. You sidle near a pair of older onlookers whispering to each other. It means she's displeased, says one, fingering a blue scarab amulet. No, it means she brings blessings. Look how bright she is, says the other. She's always bright, comes the retort. Too bright, like she's watching. You resist the urge to tell them Venus is just reflecting sunlight with absurd efficiency. They wouldn't care. Or worse, they might decide you're the one bringing the bad omens. The ceremony begins. There are chants, rhythmic claps, and a surprising number of people shaking small sistra, rattles meant to appease and attract divine attention. Offerings are piled at the altar, dates, bread, perfumed oils, and something that looks suspiciously like roast goose. There's firelight dancing on every polished surface, and Venus looks like she's pulsing with approval or irritation. You really can't tell, and neither can the priests. But they don't let that stop them. One proclaims that Venus's appearance tonight signals fertility in the fields. Another interprets it as a sign to begin repairs on a neglected canal. A third insists it means someone in the palace is lying. You have to admire the flexibility. As the ritual continues, the head priest announces a formal request to Venus. It's dramatic, full of epic adjectives, and includes at least one poetic line about the jeweled eye that does not blink. You can't help but imagine Venus up there, blinking very slowly like, "Excuse me?" Still, the people listen, and they believe. That's the remarkable part. With no telescope, no concept of planets or retrograde or elliptical orbits, they've managed to sense that this glowing wanderer is different. They don't need modern astronomy to be awestruck. You lean back against a sun-warmed pillar and feel the vibrations of the chanting in your bones. The night smells of crushed myrrh and candle wax. Venus doesn't move. It never does in the span of a single ceremony, but it feels like it's responding anyway, like it's watching. Somewhere behind you, a temple scribe scribbles notes onto a fresh scroll. He's recording tonight's events in perfect hieratic script, including the exact position of Venus relative to the crescent moon. He'll file it in the archives. In a few hundred years, someone else will find it, read the same description, and still have no idea what Venus actually is. But the belief will persist, the light will return, and someone will always think, God. You finally pull yourself away from the ceremony and wander back through the darkened streets of Memphis. Cats slink through alleys. Clay lanterns flicker in doorways. And above, Venus still gleams like it owns the sky. One last thought lingers before you sleep. How long did it take humanity to accept that some gods were just planets? And even now, aren't we all still watching the skies, waiting for a sign, a flicker, a visitor? You wake up to a goat nibbling your sandal, which honestly is a pretty gentle way to start a day in ancient Egypt. You nudge it away, sit up slowly, and blink at the dusty sunlight filtering through palm fronds. The temple is already alive with motion. Chants echo from the inner sanctum, and somewhere a pot crashes. Probably another novice getting chewed out by a senior priest with dramatic hand gestures. You wander back into the shaded halls, where the stone still holds the cool of night. The astronomer priests are already at work again, but this time not on star charts. No, today they're poring over the temple walls. Literally. You run your fingers along the etched stone. Carvings cover every surface, scenes of boats, gods, stars, people bowing, animals that are definitely not drawn to scale. And all of it is filled in with red, black, gold, and a dusty blue that refuses to fade, even after centuries. One wall in particular stops you. It's a scene you've passed before but never really looked at. A towering goddess figure, lion-headed, like Sekhmet, stands before a glowing orb in the sky. Her arms are raised in warning. Beneath her, scribes bow. Farmers shield their eyes. Even the Nile seems to recoil. You squint. That glowing orb? It's not the sun. It's placed too high, too late in the scene. It glows with distinctive five-point rays, and near it is a tiny star glyph with lines suggesting movement. Venus again. A high priest shuffles over, his arms crossed, observing your interest. That one, he says, was carved during the long brightening. You raise a brow. Apparently, sometime around the reign of Amenemhat. No, not that one. The other one. Venus had a particularly intense appearance. For weeks it blazed every night without shifting much. The people, uncertain whether this was good or bad, flooded temples with offerings. Entire goat populations were reportedly very nervous. The priests recorded it all, not in ledgers, but in art, on stone, where the stories wouldn't fade. Historians still argue whether the so-called long brightening was a real astronomical event, a rare elongation of Venus at its brightest phase, or simply a retelling of standard Venus cycles spiced up by later priests looking for drama. But when you stand here, staring at the carvings, it feels sincere. It wasn't just about the science or even the gods. It was about how people felt, the fear, the awe, the need to make sense of the sky by hammering it into stone. You trail behind a novice scribe who leads you to the side chamber where fresh inscriptions are drafted. It smells like ink and crushed pigment. Piles of scrap papyrus sit beside clay palettes stained with ochre and soot. One slab in the corner catches your eye, unpainted, half carved. It shows Venus once again, but this time accompanied by a series of dreams. That's right, dreams. You run your hand lightly across the symbols, floating figures, staircases to the sky, people sprouting wings. The scribe explains that several priests claimed to receive visions from Venus during sleep. One said the planet whispered warnings about an approaching drought. Another dreamt of a goddess stepping out of the sky and pouring honey into the Nile. You glance over at a nearby clay tablet. It's covered in rushed script, clearly someone's morning after attempt to scribble down a fading vision. Appeared before me, bright, mouth opened, no words, just light. You lean back, exhaling. These dreams weren't just spiritual fluff. To the temple staff, they were intel, like downloading divine updates straight from the cosmos, complete with some pretty wild imagery. A fringe text discovered later, buried in a tomb scroll near Thebes, claims that one particularly devout stargazer tried to map his dreams onto the actual star charts. He believed Venus's nightly angle affected the kind of vision he'd receive. Lower in the sky meant caution, higher meant renewal. He even left behind a crude dream diagram that's part astrology, part sleep journal, and part cosmic fan fiction. You return to the main temple corridor, amused but also weirdly moved. The walls here are more than decorations. They're records, visual data, sacred doodles meant to preserve not just facts but feelings. And Venus, that pesky wandering light, appears again and again in those records, sometimes a friend, sometimes a threat, always something. You pause at a carving near the entrance, a bit older than the others. It shows a pharaoh with arms outstretched, bowing not to Ra or Osiris, but to the glowing orb in the night sky, Venus unmistakably. Above his head is a single glyph, the feather of Ma'at. Balance. You smile. Even in their confusion, the Egyptians were trying to keep the universe in harmony. Venus might have been unsettling, unpredictable, maybe even terrifying, but if you acknowledged it, honored it, and wove it into your art, maybe, just maybe, it wouldn't knock everything out of whack. Outside, the day burns on. The Nile glitters. Children shout somewhere over a game involving a rock and poor aim. A merchant yells about the price of onions. But inside the temple walls, the stars are being chiseled into eternity, one mysterious dream at a time. By nightfall, the air is thick with anticipation and mosquitoes. You slap one away from your arm and squint at the horizon where Venus is starting her nightly performance. Only this time, something's off. She should be there, bright, punctual, center stage. But tonight, she's missing her cue. The priests are already fussing. You can hear their sandals scuffling anxiously across the stone courtyard, the rustle of scrolls being unrolled far too aggressively, the strained whispers of people who definitely didn't predict this in their charts. You make your way to the temple rooftop again, stepping over a discarded melon rind, don't ask, and a cat that's either asleep or deeply unimpressed. When you look up, you find what the priests are panicking about. Venus isn't where she's supposed to be. The stars are out. The moon is doing its silvery thing, but Venus is just gone. Or rather, she's somewhere she shouldn't be. Lower, dimmer, or perhaps completely hiding behind the curvature of the earth they don't yet know exists. This isn't a new experience for them. Venus disappears often, part of her regular cycle, but every time she does, it triggers a crisis of confidence. One novice priest near you clutches a lotus pendant like it's a panic button. She's fled, he whispers. The goddess has turned her face away. Another mutters that it must be a sign of imbalance, that maybe someone in the palace has broken a vow or forgotten an offering. It's amazing how quickly an absent dot in the sky turns into a royal conspiracy. Historians still argue whether these Venus disappearances were tracked as regular patterns or treated like spontaneous omens each time. The Egyptians were observant, sure, but they weren't necessarily obsessed with mathematical precision the way later Babylonian astronomers were. For them, this was spiritual, not surgical. And tonight, the vibe is full-blown sky ghost panic. The high priest appears with great drama, holding a small obsidian mirror. He raises it toward the sky, reflecting what little light is available, as if hoping to coax Venus back like a shy cat. When that doesn't work, he gestures to a younger scribe. "Prepare the altar," he says grimly. "We'll need the good incense." Ah, yes, the good stuff. You trail the scribe as he scurries down into the temple stores, where baskets of resins, spices, and oils sit neatly stacked, until he rummages through them like a frantic teenager before a date. He pulls out a small jar labeled with a spiral glyph. Frankincense mixed with something extra, probably myrrh, maybe cinnamon, possibly ancient priestly wishful thinking. Back at the rooftop, the ritual begins. There's chanting again, always chanting. You wonder if any priest ever just tried saying, "Hey, Venus, you good?" But no, this is Egypt. You've got to make it formal. The chants rise, the smoke swirls upward, and all the while, Venus continues to not show up properly. You can tell everyone's trying not to freak out. One fringe record from a lesser-known temple near Elephantine describes a moment like this with such drama, it could have been an epic poem. Venus vanished unexpectedly, and the temple responded by declaring a week of silence. No music, no festivals, no public laughter, just solemn quiet, as if sound itself might offend the heavens. You kind of wish they'd chosen that route tonight. Instead, the priests are leaning fully into performance mode. Someone has started shaking a sistrum with such intensity that you're beginning to worry for their wrist health. Another pours oil into a brazier, creating a tall flame that momentarily blinds everyone facing it. But no Venus. And so, in a rare show of vulnerability, the high priest admits something terrifying. They don't know where she's gone. This, for a culture that prides itself on cosmic order and divine precision, is more frightening than a crocodile in your laundry. To compensate, they begin listing possible meanings for Venus's disappearance. a warning of war, an omen of royal betrayal, a coming shift in the flood cycle, a new god being born. Someone sneezed at the wrong time during last week's full moon celebration. You're fairly certain that last one is a joke. But then again, maybe not. A nearby priest jots these all down on a wax tablet, and you glance at his handwriting. It's rushed, frantic. There's no confidence here, just damage control dressed in ceremonial gold. The truth is, Venus didn't disappear to make a statement. She's just gone invisible, too close to the sun's glare to be seen from Earth. But for them, this isn't orbital mechanics. It's personal. Venus isn't just a light in the sky. She's a being with intent. Her absence is interpreted as sulking, or worse, retreat. The goddess has pulled back, turned her eyes from the mortal world, and now everyone's trying to figure out what they did wrong. The ceremony winds down. The incense thins. The high priest gives one last flourish of the arms and declares that further offerings will be made at dawn. He does not sound optimistic. You sit on the edge of the rooftop long after the crowd disperses. The night is cooler now, quieter. And up above, the stars blink softly, steady, disinterested, ancient. Venus will be back. You know this. She always returns. But tonight, her absence speaks louder than any chant. By morning, the temple smells like 100 kinds of desperation. Burnt cedar, crushed juniper berries, melted myrrh, and just a hint of panic sweat. You wander back through the inner sanctum as preparations ramp up for what might be the most excessive planetary peace offering ever attempted by anyone who can't explain retrograde. The priests are planning a ceremony. Not just any ceremony, a reconciliation. The kind normally reserved for offended royalty, or the time someone spilled sacred beer on a statue of Horus and tried to pretend it was due. This time, it's for Venus. You're ushered into the preparation hall where offerings are piling up like a divine gift registry gone rogue. There's an entire clay basin of rose water, garlands of lotus petals strung by hand, and more dates than anyone could possibly eat, even if you were an eternally radiant goddess with a sweet tooth and a lot of free time. In the corner, an elderly priest is supervising the anointing of small carved idols, each representing one of the known wandering stars. Venus gets the fanciest one, obviously, painted gold with blue coal-ringed eyes and a tiny lapis amulet around her neck. Mars looks like someone carved it in a hurry while bored. You're handed a bronze bowl filled with scented oils and asked to help smear it across a ceremonial pathway, one that leads from the temple gate to the central altar. Apparently, Venus is expected to walk that route in spirit. You oblige, trailing the viscous, perfumed oil across the stones, leaving a shiny, glistening trail like a very spiritual snail. This is no quick fix. They've scheduled chants, dances, and 3 different styles of sacred music. It's less like a ritual and more like a divine dinner theater where the guest of honor hasn't RSVP'd in centuries. And now the public's involved. Word has spread through Memphis that the goddess of the evening flame has turned her gaze away, which means every mother with an unruly child, every farmer with a pest problem, every merchant whose accounts don't add up, all of them now believe Venus is responsible. One man shows up with a painted egg and insists it's an ancient family tradition to offer it to the stars, just in case. A woman brings a small ceramic piglet and places it solemnly at the foot of the altar. When asked why, she simply replies, "Because pigs are humble." Fair enough. Fringe accounts from the Old Kingdom hint that similar sky apologies took place more often than official records would admit. One text mentions a procession of smoke, during which people burned incense continuously for 3 days to win back a disappearing celestial being, likely Venus. Another describes a temple that rang copper bells through the night because they believed silence offended her. Historians still argue whether these elaborate ceremonies were scheduled affairs, predetermined by charts, or reactive spectacles born of fear and peer pressure. Watching the chaos unfold today, it feels very much like the latter. The procession begins just as the sun starts its descent. The priests lead the way, fanning sacred air with palm fronds and trailing clouds of incense that would knock out a modest sized goat. Musicians follow, plucking harps and shaking rattles. Behind them, dancers swirl in measured steps, their linen robes catching the last gold light of the day. And at the very end, hundreds of common folk with offerings in their arms and hope in their eyes. You fall into step near the middle, careful not to trip over a jug of wine balanced precariously by a man whose idea of holy gift clearly leans toward bribery. Everyone's watching the sky now, searching. Venus isn't back yet, but the people are betting she's close. When they reach the altar, the high priest gives a booming invocation, half plea, half flattery. He speaks of Venus's beauty, her wisdom, her unmatched glow. He compares her to the sacred flame, the Nile in full bloom, the laughter of a blessed child. Honestly, it's like reading a divine dating profile. Then the gifts are laid out, one by one. Fruit, oils, jewelry, a surprisingly large and fluffy cat that does not want to be there. The crowd bows their heads. The musicians play a final soft refrain. And then, silence. You all wait. Even the wind seems to pause. And then someone gasps. You look up, just over the horizon, barely visible through the pink haze of twilight. There, Venus. Subtle at first, a glimmer, a shy gleam, like she's peeking around the edge of the world to see if the party's still going. Then brighter, clearer, more certain. The crowd erupts in gentle exclamations. No wild cheers. This is still a religious affair, but there's visible relief. Shoulders drop, eyes widen. One old woman presses her fingers to her lips and whispers a thank you. You stare, heart unexpectedly warmed. Was it the ceremony? Coincidence? A bit of both? Who knows? But Venus is back, and for now that's enough. The priests declare the goddess appeased. Tomorrow there will be dancing. Offerings will be redistributed, some to the poor, others kept for more ceremonies. The cat is allowed to leave and does so with exaggerated offense. You walk home through the soft night, your sandals sticky with scented oil and your thoughts drifting skyward. Venus doesn't explain herself. She never does. But when she vanishes, people notice. And when she returns, they throw her a party. The next morning is quiet in that tense, post-party sort of way. The kind of quiet that says, we got through it, but let's not do that again. You shuffle through the streets of Memphis, the air thick with last night's lingering incense and the faintest whiff of roasted dates. People are smiling again. Even the goats look slightly more relaxed. Venus, now securely back in the sky, is once again the celebrity of the hour. But not everyone celebrating. Inside the palace compound, less showy than you'd expect, more practical limestone than golden grandeur, the mood is considerably more serious. The Pharaoh's advisors have gathered, and they do not like surprises, especially celestial ones, especially bright ones that cause public freakouts and force them to dig through dusty scrolls for explanations that don't exist. You sneak into the edge of the hall, wedged between a marble column and a particularly nosy cat who seems to have made this corner its personal surveillance post. At the center, the pharaoh sits straight backed on a low dais, wearing an expression that says, I'm pretending to be divine, but I'm also exhausted. He listens intently as the high priest of Ptah, freshly perfumed and clearly nervous, explains Venus's recent antics in the most flattering possible terms. She came, not to judge, but to remind, the priest says, bowing deeply, to illuminate our vigilance. Which is a fancy way of saying, we don't know what happened, but we're calling it a blessing, so we don't all get fired. But the court astrologers aren't having it. One, an older man with a beard so meticulously oiled it might qualify as flammable, steps forward with a clay tablet. The charts were wrong, he says simply. Our predictions missed her reappearance by 3 days. 3 days. In ancient Egypt, where time was sacred and the heavens formed the backbone of ritual, that's not just a mistake. That's an omen, or worse, a crack in the cosmic contract. Historians still argue whether pharaohs truly relied on astrologers' advice or just humored them like particularly dramatic consultants. But here, you can tell it matters. This pharaoh frowns, his gaze flicking between the astrologers and his general, who is conveniently polishing a spear like he's ready to blame this whole thing on military inaction. The room tightens. Because here's the thing. Venus doesn't just show up in temples, she shows up in politics. The ancient Egyptians believed that the heavens reflected earthly power. If Venus glowed brightly near a coronation, it was a good sign. If she disappeared during a harvest, it meant someone, somewhere, had misbehaved. And if she rose unexpectedly or refused to follow her typical pattern, well, maybe the gods weren't happy with the current regime. You watch as a younger priest nervously unrolls a scroll depicting past appearances of the wandering star. He highlights one from the reign of Sneferu. Venus appeared during a rebellion and was later declared the goddess of calm after the revolt was crushed. Very convenient. Another advisor, a portly man who's been fidgeting with his necklace for 10 minutes, offers a different interpretation. Perhaps, he says delicately, the goddess is not warning the pharaoh. Perhaps she's protecting him from enemies. Ah, yes, the ancient art of turning an astronomical glitch into political propaganda works every time. Suddenly, a younger voice speaks up. A novice scribe, barely old enough to grow decent facial hair, raises his hand. But what if she's just doing her thing? The room goes still. You brace yourself. The high priest arches a brow. Her thing? The scribe shrinks. I mean, what if it's not about us? What if the stars move because that's just how the heavens work? You hear a pin drop, or maybe it's just someone's patience. The priest responds with an elaborate sigh. Everything is about us. You try not to laugh. The cat beside you does not succeed. It sneezes so loudly that the pharaoh actually turns his head slightly, which is ancient royal for I acknowledge this. Despite the tension, the pharaoh finally waves a hand, signaling both the end of the conversation and possibly a headache. He stands slowly and walks toward the courtyard. Everyone follows, quietly. Outside, the sun blazes overhead, and in the pale blue just above the horizon, Venus still lingers faintly, visible in daylight, if you squint hard enough and tilt your head just right. It's rare, but not impossible. The pharaoh gazes up. He says nothing. But later that day, a new decree is announced. Temples across the land are to hold weekly skywatch and vigils, especially during key planetary transitions. A new wall carving is ordered, a depiction of Venus above the pharaoh's head, shining like a crown. The message is clear. She returned for him. Not everyone buys it, of course. Some of the older astrologers exchange glances that say, well, that's one way to spin it, but the people eat it up. Priests chant, markets buzz, and one particularly enthusiastic merchant starts selling Venus charms with inscriptions like glows for Pharaoh. You wander through the courtyard one more time, passing a sculptor chiseling the first lines of the new Royal Venus stele. It reads, "When the heavens shimmered, she chose him." You roll your eyes slightly, but you can't help it. You glance skyward. Still there, still bright, still burning. No matter how you dress it up, in myth, in politics, in prophecy, Venus is just out there, doing her thing. But here on Earth, everyone's still trying to claim her. It's a scorcher today. The sun is melting over Memphis like a pot of ancient honey left too close to the fire, and you're doing your best not to become a puddle in a linen tunic. The priests, despite their layers and robes and general air of being above heat stroke, are just as sweaty as everyone else. Except one. He's standing on a sun-bleached platform near the temple courtyard, face tilted skyward, arms outstretched, utterly unbothered. You squint at him from the shade. That's Heru, the senior stargazer of this temple district, and he's been out here for nearly an hour, studying Venus, or rather, trying to, because the midday sun is blinding and Venus has gone faint again. Still technically visible, but only if you've trained your eyes by decades of squinting directly into the abyss. You sidle over, a bit hesitant. He glances at you, smiles faintly, and says, "It helps if you smear your eyelids with crocodile dung." Ah, there it is, ancient Egypt's favorite multitasker. Crocodile dung had a long and pungent career in Egyptian life. It was used for everything from fertility charms to medicine, and yes, even as a form of eye protection against the blazing sun. Think of it as the world's most fragrant SPF. You decline politely. Heru shrugs and points upward. She's there, just behind the light, still watching. You try. You really do. But all you get is an afterimage of your own hopes and the unsettling feeling that your corneas are now lightly broiled. Still, it's a good reminder. Egyptians didn't just watch Venus at night. They tracked her whenever they could. Dawn, dusk, even through the harsh midday haze, when only the most obsessed stargazers bothered. And obsession? Oh, they had it in spades. Back in the temple archive, you find a scroll smeared with wax, ink, and a faint scent of something smoky. It's a chart, but not one for farmers or festivals. This one's about Venus's position during abnormal events, droughts, stillbirths, dreams involving serpents. One entry reads, Day 23, bright eye gone. A cow birthed twins. One did not breathe. Not exactly peer-reviewed material, but it paints a clear picture. Venus wasn't just admired, she was blamed. Historians still argue whether the association between Venus and omens was widespread in Egyptian practice or limited to a few particularly theatrical temples, but it's clear some priests kept what you might politely call a celestial complaint log, and sometimes they got things hilariously wrong. You flip another scroll and find a record of a double Venus night. According to the scribe, Venus appeared in two places at once, glowing in both the west and the east. You know what that likely was? Venus and Jupiter. But without telescopes, it must have looked like the goddess duplicated herself or brought a sister. The priest who recorded it was so unnerved, he took to fasting and silence, which in priest speak means he panic quit for a week. Outside, a small group of students is trying to recreate Venus's track using polished stones laid in the sand. Each stone marks a day's observation. The trouble is, the data's fuzzy, clouds, dust, the occasional bird getting in the way. You crouch beside them watching as they place a black stone slightly out of alignment. That's too far south, you say gently. The oldest student, maybe 13, full of confidence, nods. That's because she's angry today. Right. Science meets sass. You help them adjust the layout, and soon a wobbly pattern begins to emerge, a gentle curve, then a loop. Retrograde motion, even if they have no name for it yet. Fringe theories later written by Greco-Egyptian scribes claim Venus danced backward to confuse enemies. Some even thought she was chasing or fleeing another star. You'd laugh if it weren't so relatable. Who hasn't backed out of a bad scene without explaining themselves? Later, you follow Heru to the temple's observatory. Really just a tall platform with a better view and less goat interference. He hands you a reed stylus and a bit of bark. Try marking her position, he says, nodding toward the horizon. You squint again. This time you see her, dim, delicate, like the sky blinking slowly. You mark the angle. Heru glances, grunts, and says, "Good enough." She moves like a goddess pretending not to. You both sit in silence for a while, watching Venus hover. You know, he says eventually, some think she's two different stars. You turn to him. Morning one, evening one, both too bright to be normal, but never in the sky together, like twins taking turns. He leans back, chuckling. If I were her, I'd keep everyone guessing too. Historians still haven't settled whether the Egyptians fully realized Venus was a single object seen at different times, or if they treated it as two separate deities. The texts are vague, the myths vaguely poetic. But the confusion makes sense. You see a brilliant light before dawn, gently glowing, graceful. Later, another appears after sunset, bold, fiery, staring you down. It's easy to assume you're dealing with two different characters, like Venus pulling double duty, morning shift and night shift. By sunset, the city feels more relaxed. Venus has returned to her proper perch, glowing just above the palms, smug as ever. In the market, someone sells Venus sugar, which is just honey packed into star-shaped jars. Someone else is offering glow powder, which suspiciously smells like crushed chalk and optimism. You walk home with a pouch of dried figs and a tiny stone charm, a tiny star etched into its surface. It's supposed to bring celestial favor. You hang it from your belt and look up. Venus winks. Probably. The day begins not with bird song or the bustle of vendors, but with a peculiar announcement from the temple of Seshat, goddess of writing and record keeping. The calendar has been revised again. You roll your eyes gently, but with love. This is the third adjustment this season, and you're starting to suspect it has less to do with agriculture and more to do with Venus acting like a dramatic house guest no one can predict. The priests are spinning it as divine recalibration. You suspect it's just creative spreadsheeting with papyrus. You make your way through Memphis, past a chalkboard where a frazzled temple scribe is crossing out one festival date and scribbling in another. His ink-stained fingers tremble slightly. His muttered curses are definitely not suitable for polite priestly company. The culprit? Venus again. Last night she flared brighter than expected. Too early, too high. And that threw the whole system out of whack. You duck into the shaded temple colonnade where Heru, our crocodile dung enthusiast and celestial chaos wrangler, is already mid-rant. The calendar is a lie, he declares to a group of half-awake students, not because it was meant to deceive, but because it assumes the sky behaves. You stifle a laugh. The students nod solemnly, as if they understand, which they absolutely do not. Venus, as usual, is the rogue piece on the otherwise well-oiled board. The Egyptians love their patterns. 3 seasons, 12 months, 30 days each. But Venus didn't read the memo. Her cycle, those 584 Earth days between appearances, is just off enough to ruin everything. So they fudge it. One priest waves a scroll at you, full of complex annotations. We'll just adjust the star days, he says. And the moon festival, another adds helpfully. And the planting feast, chimes in a third. At this point, the Egyptian calendar is starting to look like someone's Netflix watch history. Noble intentions, but mostly chaos. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians truly adjusted their whole calendar based on Venus's behavior or just ceremonial parts of it. But in practice, you can see the shifts happening. Small edits, holy days bumped around, harvest festivals delayed because the evening goddess glowed too long this month. In one scroll you find tucked behind a statue of Thoth, there's a list of Venus-adjusted days, including Day of Cleansing Lanterns, Night of the Hidden Flame, Feast of Returned Light, moved again. It's hard not to admire the dedication, and it's not just the festival schedule. Some priests are trying to realign the civil calendar to match Venus's appearances. A bold move, considering the Nile still floods on its own stubborn schedule, and farmers tend to care more about water than planetary bling. You follow Heru as he climbs to the observatory again, this time with a wooden plank etched with a grid. This, he says, is the new Venus. Chart, you blink at it. It looks like someone taught a beetle how to graph. He explains, each square is a day. Each dot marks Venus's brightness. They're attempting to track her pattern against the old star calendars, trying to forecast her next bold entrance. The problem? She's moody. One column is labeled Surprise Glow, and another, Possible Vanishing. It's like scheduling a meeting with a deity who has no interest in attending, Heru mutters. Outside the temple, you find farmers standing in the shade, grumbling. Their planting season is shifting again. One tells you he's now waiting to sow his barley until Venus passes out of the blinding quadrant. Why? You ask. He shrugs. My wife had a dream. Venus told her the roots would rot. You nod politely. You've learned not to challenge cosmic marital advice. A fringe tale carved faintly into a limestone block near Edfu tells of an entire harvest season abandoned because Venus appeared during a lunar eclipse. The priests panicked, declared the soil tainted with shadow, and ordered everyone to chant for 12 days. Not one seed planted. The city survived barely, but the goats were reportedly very confused. Inside the palace, meanwhile, the scribes are busy editing the official royal calendar again. You peek at one page, a bright red line through Star Festival with a note scrawled beside it. Glow too strong. Postponed indefinitely. You wonder if Venus is up there smirking. One scribe you talk to, a woman with sharp eyes and permanently ink-stained fingertips, admits the truth with a sigh. We're not managing a calendar, she says. We're playing celestial charades. Venus gestures vaguely, and we scramble to guess what it means. You wander back through the temple halls as the sun begins to drop again. The light slants golden across the stone, casting long shadows. Venus hasn't appeared yet, but you know she will. And when she does, the priests will note the angle, the brightness, the color of the clouds, the exact number of locusts buzzing overhead. Because they have to. If the stars don't match the schedule, then the schedule must change. That's the law of the sky. Or at least, the law of trying not to get smited by a sparkling point of light. You pass a boy outside, writing numbers in the dirt with a stick. His father leans over his shoulder, watching. Is it for school, you ask? The boy shakes his head. Number I'm drawing when Venus was late. You smile. Good luck, kid. You head home under a sky just beginning to turn deep blue. Above you, Venus slides into view, fashionably late, still the brightest object in the heavens. And you whisper, don't worry. We moved the party for you. You return to the temple just before dusk, hoping for peace and maybe a date cake. Instead, you're immediately handed a stylus and told, we're behind on the chart revisions. Apparently, no one told Venus she was supposed to keep a consistent schedule this month. Again. The main observatory chamber is chaotic in that special way only ancient bureaucracy can achieve. Scrolls unrolled across tables, feathers flying from the quills, wax tablets balancing dangerously on wine jars. One novice is arguing with a wall because he ran out of ink and blames bad star energy. Another is carefully measuring a row of ink dots with a piece of string. Welcome to the glamorous life of celestial record keeping. You settle next to Heru, who's trying, valiantly we'll say, to redraw Venus's path across the sky. The latest position data doesn't match last season's projection. Not even close. She moved backward, he says, pointing at the curved line on his papyrus. That's not allowed, another priest mutters. Stars don't do that. You glance at the chart. Yep, there it is, a loop. Venus, during her retrograde phase, seems to pause and then slither backward across the night like a goddess in stubborn retreat. To us moderns, it's an optical illusion caused by Earth's own orbit. To the Egyptians, it's a divine mood swing with paperwork consequences. Heru sighs and dips his quill into soot-thick ink. Redo the angle from day 82 and check the reflection values in the basin records. You blink. Basin records? He gestures to a side alcove where an ancient stone bowl is half filled with still water. At night, they use it to reflect the stars, an early watery observatory. Venus's position relative to the ripples is considered sensitive data, like divine tea leaves. You tiptoe over. Two scribes are hunched over the water, murmuring, nudging a palm leaf across the surface to simulate wind. One jots down, light drifted left, possibly due to anger. You decide not to comment. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians truly mapped retrograde motion or just treated it as random divine reversal. The looping patterns of Venus were known well enough that some charts show rough approximations. But when you're drawing with a feather and your telescope is a bowl of water, rough is generous. You return to the main chart. Heru's rewritten it again. Now Venus's path overlaps with a glyph of a lion and a feather. What's that, you ask? He doesn't look up. Justice and regret. Right. Of course. Makes perfect sense. The temple doesn't just want to chart Venus, they want to explain her. Every shift in her path is wrapped in meaning. A loop near the crocodile glyph? Expect floods? A pause beside the scarab? Rebirth is coming. Her curve touches the eye of Ra. Prepare for revelations, or maybe pink eye. Interpretations vary. You notice something odd on the edge of one. Scroll, a cluster of tally marks, tiny scratches organized in rows. You point to them. What's that? Heru leans in. Failed predictions. He says it so casually, like it's just part of the job. Which it is. The astronomer priests aren't pretending to be infallible. They know the sky dances just out of reach. Every night, they try to predict Venus's next step. Sometimes they get it right. Most of the time, not quite. Every mistake is still a message, Heru says. The goddess confuses to awaken. You can't help but grin. That's one way to spin a wrong chart. In the corner, another team is re-inking the great star map, a wall-sized display of dots, curves, and oddly expressive glyphs. One priest, clearly sleep-deprived, is arguing over the placement of a single red dot. It should be here, he insists, just above the jackal sign. No, it belongs beside the horizon glyph, the other says. It was brighter that night, the first huffs. You saw it. I saw your foot trip over the offering plate. That's all I saw. You watch them bicker, vaguely impressed that they cared this much about where to place a single dot. That dot could determine the next month's predictions. One small celestial misprint could lead to delayed planting, revised feasts, or awkward letters to the palace explaining why the pharaoh's lucky day started with a bee sting. A fringe tale preserved on a stone fragment in Saqqara tells of a scribe who miscalculated Venus's position by 2 degrees, leading to a funeral being scheduled on what turned out to be a high holiday. The result? Mixed omens, a deeply confused crowd, and one poor goat sacrificed twice. As the sun sets, you and Heru step outside to cross-reference the charts with the real sky. Venus has begun to glow, still stubbornly out of sync with predictions. She likes her surprises, Heru says. You nod, squinting upward. She's curving again, you whisper. Heru doesn't reply right away. Instead, he pulls a small piece of ivory from his robe, a tiny marker carved with Venus's glyph. He places it gently on the fresh chart, just outside the projected path. Let's see if she follows it, he murmurs. You help him weigh it down with a pebble, just in case the wind decides to take sides. By the time you leave the observatory, stars are twinkling lazily into view. Venus hangs there, bright, tilted slightly west of where she should be. Not wrong, just contrary. And maybe, just maybe, she knows you're watching. The next day begins with optimism, dangerous, fragile optimism. A new chart has been hung in the temple's Hall of Celestial Affairs, a huge fresh scroll painted in bold lines and ink still faintly tacky. It displays Venus's projected movement for the next 80 days, complete with color-coded phases, generous arrows, and enough divine symbols to require a glossary. You study it over a breakfast of barley bread and a suspiciously purple fig. It's beautiful, you admit. Clean, balanced, symmetrical. Which is impressive, considering Venus herself refuses to be any of those things. Heru joins you, cup of fermented date juice in hand. He's looking far too pleased with himself. We've solved it, he says. Have you? Yes, he insists. Venus follows a pattern of four cycles, four turns. Every eighth year, she returns to the same place in the sky. You blink at him. That almost sounds correct. And it is, sort of. Venus's cycle relative to Earth does line up every 8 years. It's a fact later observed with mathematical precision by civilizations with better instruments. The Egyptians? They noticed it the hard way, with papyrus and prayer and a whole lot of very tired scribes. You follow Heru to a chamber tucked behind the main sanctuary. Inside is what he calls the serious room. It's full of diagrams, lines etched into stone benches, measuring cords, and a reed basket overflowing with discarded calculation sheets. Two junior priests are bickering over something involving ratios and a particularly fussy moon chart. The angle is too sharp, one insists. The angle is divinely sharp, the other retorts. You love it here. Heru explains the newest theory. Venus follows a looped cycle that resets every 8 Egyptian years. But because their calendar is 365 days with no leap years, the timing slowly drifts. So they're creating adjustment days, essentially fudge factors to make the math pretend it works. Sacred math, Heru calls it. Historians still argue whether the Egyptians genuinely understood Venus's 8-year cycle or if they stumbled upon it through accumulated observation. Some inscriptions suggest they almost had it, close enough to notice the pattern, but without the tools to fully prove it. You're handed a clay tablet and told to help plot one of Venus's earlier returns. You do your best, drawing tiny dots in a loose curve, occasionally smudging the clay with your elbow. A novice beside you is using beads on a string to count nights. His brow furrows deeply. I think I lost the loop, he whispers. That's pretty much the slogan of the day. Heru, meanwhile, is unfazed. He's taken to calling Venus the playful one. You're not sure if that's reverence or resignation. Possibly both. And yet, despite the guesswork and the quiet chaos, there's something earnest about it all. They want to get it right. They need to. Because their society is wrapped in time. Not mechanical time, but spiritual time. If Venus moves out of rhythm, it's not just a star problem. It's a world problem. So, when the new calculations don't match the expected rising by even a single night, Heru simply tilts his head and smiles. Add another sacred day, he says. One of the students hesitates. We've already added 3. Then add one more. Call it the gleam of renewal. He shrugs. No one argues with gleaming. You're starting to suspect half the holidays on the calendar exist because Venus misbehaved. And then, right when everyone's convinced they fixed it, Venus shows up early. Again, it's not days early, but just enough to make the chart look foolish. And the scribes regret not triple-checking their reflection basin readings. One apprentice accidentally drops his ink jar in surprise. Another starts muttering that Venus is testing him personally. The revised chart is taken down before sunset, quietly, with dignity, mostly. A fringe note on a scrap of linen found in an old storage jar hints that one particularly embarrassed priest once blamed invisible stars for Venus's erratic motion. He claimed there were hidden celestial bodies dragging her off course. Modern readers laugh, but secretly, it sounds a lot like someone inventing dark matter 3,000 years too early. By twilight, the mood has shifted. There's no anger, only acceptance. Venus will do what she wants, always has. You and Heru sit outside, backs against a sandstone column, feet dusty, hands stained with ink and soot. The night sky opens above you, clear and vast. She teases us, Heru says, like a cat pretending not to notice your attention. You nod. Do you think we'll ever chart her perfectly? He laughs. Why would she want that? In the end, they redraw the chart again. This time with more curves, more allowances, more question marks. At the bottom corner, someone adds a new symbol, a stylized eye winking, just in case Venus appreciates the joke. The temple courtyard is unusually loud tonight. Not from prayers or rituals, those are standard. It's the whispers, dozens of them. Priests murmuring to one another under the flicker of oil lamps, novices pressed together in huddled clusters, citizens pretending to offer incense while sneaking side-eye glances at the sky. Something has changed. Venus, as always, is part of the conversation. But tonight, she's being accused of more than mischief. You make your way to the outer gardens where people gather at dusk, usually to share food and trade gossip about the neighbor who keeps suspiciously well-fed ducks. Tonight, though, the topic is far from domestic. A young woman with a bright sash leans in and whispers, "He says Venus isn't a star at all. He says it moves like a messenger or a ship." A ship. You raise an eyebrow. She points to an older man standing in the shadows near a sycamore, clutching a carved walking stick that's far too ornate to be just for walking. He's mid-story, surrounded by a group of listeners who all wear the faces of people trying not to get in trouble. And then the fire grew from the sky, he says, but there was no smoke, only sound, and the ground did not shake, only the goats. You squint. This is going to be a fun one. The man, his name is Beck apparently, claims he saw Venus shift mid-sky. Not rise, not set, but change direction. Flicker like fire, then stabilize. He says it buzzed, that it gave off soundless noise, which admittedly is quite the poetic oxymoron. Fringe theory? Absolutely. But this is Egypt, where myth and mystery dance arm in arm, and Venus is already suspect. Later texts, ones not carved in stone but scribbled hastily on pottery shards, preserve wild tales like Beck's. One tells of Venus splitting briefly into twin lights and rejoining as one. Another speaks of a golden flame that blinked in place for 10 breaths before vanishing. None of it makes the official temple records, of course. Too strange, too wrong. But the stories persist, passed from ear to ear, told in moonlit courtyards like this one. You lean closer to Beck. Did anyone else see it? He shrugs. Maybe, but only I said it out loud. A bold move. Not everyone appreciates cosmic improvisation. In fact, later that evening, one of the high priests from the Temple of Thoth makes a formal announcement. Venus is behaving normally. Any claims to the contrary are unhelpful and potentially disrespectful to the divine. Translation: stop saying weird things. You're stressing everyone out. But it's too late. The seed has been planted. That night, 2 other witnesses step forward. One describes seeing a dark line around Venus like a halo turned inward. Another says she heard singing, no words, just tones, when she looked at it too long. It's all very speculative. And yet, you can't help but feel the tension creeping in. Because Venus does move. Oddly sometimes. She vanishes, reappears, loops backwards, glows with impossible brightness. She's everything a stable, predictable sky object shouldn't be. Historians still argue whether these fringe stories were dismissed outright or quietly absorbed into private beliefs. Egypt was flexible that way. The official version of things could stay pristine, while the real stories flowed underneath, like the Nile in flood season, uncontainable, messy, vital. You walk through the temple corridor, past murals that show Venus as an eye, as a jewel, as a flaming goddess descending with wings. They knew she wasn't ordinary. They just didn't say all the parts out loud. One papyrus, tucked into a half-crushed jar found in a minor temple ruin centuries later, reads, "I dreamt the star was hollow. I stood inside it. The walls were smooth. The light came from no fire." No official glyphs for alien spacecraft, of course, but if ever ancient text tiptoed in that direction, Dilao, well, this was it. Still, the mainstream narrative holds. Venus is a goddess, a messenger, a warning, a blessing, but not a craft, not a machine, not a visitor in the literal sense. You step outside again, the night now deep and velvet dark. Venus gleams above, unmoving, quiet, innocent. But the whispers continue. At the back of the courtyard, someone's scratching a new glyph into soft clay, a star with tiny lines around it, like motion trails. A new symbol for a new story. You ask the scribe what it means. He glances at you and says, "She came closer last night. I felt it." You don't know what to believe anymore, but you do know this. Venus doesn't need to move to cause a stir. She just needs to shine. You return to the temple on a day that feels quieter. Not in volume. There are still sandals clapping stone, traders hawking garlic that somehow smells like triumph and despair, but in energy. The kind of quiet that suggests people are letting go of something. A little awe, a little fear, maybe a few wild Venus theories they wish they hadn't shared so publicly. The sky is perfectly clear, no clouds, no omens, just the usual blue haze of Egypt in dry season. And above the city, still as ever, Venus rests in her typical evening post, low on the horizon, not quite as bright as before, as though she's stepping out of the spotlight on her own terms. Inside the temple, the murals are getting a touch-up. You stop to watch two apprentices carefully repaint the eye of Hathor above a depiction of the night sky. One mutters, "Still can't decide if this is supposed to be her watching us or her blinking." A priest nearby sighs, "Don't overthink it." That's the mood these days. Don't overthink it. The official line now is that Venus was never a warning, never a threat, just a loyal, predictable light. The temple has started phasing out the more dramatic carvings. No more flames bursting from the goddess's eyes. No more panicked star priests pointing to loops in the sky. They're simplifying the story and quietly retiring the fringe ones. You wander to the archive where the older scrolls are kept, some crisp and pristine, others fraying at the edges like overused slippers. Heru is there, of course, squinting at a brittle chart with a feather pin stuck behind one ear. "They're editing the records," he says, not bothering to look up. "Venus will soon behave again." You raise an eyebrow. "It's easier," he explains. "Takes fewer scrolls." You laugh softly, but he's not wrong. When Venus follows the script, life runs smoother. No unexpected offerings, no calendar upheaval, no waking up to find someone carved a diagram of a star that sang into the side of a public well. Heru closes the scroll and gestures for you to follow. You do, trailing him into a smaller back room where older, unlabeled documents are kept in sealed clay jars. He cracks one open and pulls out a faded fragment. It shows Venus, curving backward, clearly looping, and beside her, a priest with wide eyes and an open mouth, not chanting, screaming. Temple didn't like this one, Heru says, filed it under dream records. Historians still argue whether temples destroyed records that contradicted official sky narratives or just quietly buried them. Egypt wasn't big on erasure, too permanent. But they were experts in misdirection. If Venus's chaos made people uneasy, they just changed the ending. You visit a scribe later that afternoon, one of the quieter ones, more comfortable with ink than incense. He's been assigned to transcribe clarified Venus appearances, edited versions of events where the goddess never looped, never disappeared, never flared so brightly that everyone lost sleep for a week. You ask him how he feels about it, he shrugs. Sometimes stories need smoothing, so people can rest. You get it. Nobody wants to worship a cosmic wild card forever. You can't build lasting rituals on unpredictability. People want their gods stable, their planets orderly, their scrolls tidy. Back in the marketplace, you see a vendor repurposing old Venus amulets. He's scraping off the exaggerated flame motif and replacing it with simple five-pointed stars. They sell better now, he says, with a grin. Too much drama in the old designs. You keep walking. Even the priests have toned things down. The grand rooftop observations have become more reserved. Less frantic data gathering, more quiet contemplation. Heru still keeps a personal chart, but it's mostly for fun now. You ask him if he misses the chaos. Not really, he says, then pauses. A little. That night, you visit the temple's edge and gaze up at the sky. Venus is there, glowing gently. No curve, no flare, just a steady light. But in your mind, you remember all the times she wasn't. The loops, the disappearances, the wild dreams, the double star nights, the time someone seriously tried to name her a flying jewel with opinions. They haven't erased those stories. Not completely. They live in margins, in quiet conversations, in faint carvings you can only see in moonlight. The sky remembers, even if the scrolls pretend not to. The desert wind is soft tonight, barely more than a breath. Sand curls along the edges of temple walls as you stand atop the observatory once more. The city of Memphis spread below like a sleeping beast. Torches flicker here and there, their orange glow no match for what glows above. Venus, still loyal, still bright, but this time, you're not watching her alone. Next to you, Heru holds a curious object, something new, not from Egypt, not even from this millennium. It's a telescope. Bronze tubes fitted into one another, borrowed from a visiting scholar who claims to be from a land where they've charted stars with numbers you can't pronounce and tools that don't require wet papyrus or dreams. Heru peers through it, and for a moment, you see the hardened stargazer return to something like childhood. She's still the same, he says, just bigger. And she is. Through the lens, Venus reveals herself in shocking detail. Not a twinkle, but a sphere. Not divine fire, but a planet. A real one, with phases like the moon, shadows, and a glow caused not by magic but by sunlight hitting sulfuric clouds. It's glorious, it's messy, and it changes nothing, but also everything. The visiting scholar explains the path of Venus with numbers in Latin words, talks about orbit and inferior conjunction and gravitational pull. He draws elliptical diagrams on parchment with startling confidence. He doesn't once invoke a god. Heru listens, nods politely, and then returns to his own charts. Simpler, yes, and inaccurate by modern standards, but drawn with a kind of affection you don't find in equations. Because for all the science, all the telescopes and formulas, Venus remains the same stubborn, beautiful problem she always was. You think back to a carving you saw just last week, high up on a worn temple wall, nearly erased by time. It showed two figures looking upward, one holding a bowl of water, the other just holding their breath. Between them, Venus. Not a goddess, not even named, just a glowing presence. Historians today sometimes marvel at how long Venus has fooled us. We saw her as two stars, morning star and evening star, long before realizing they were one. We assumed she was the brightest, the nearest, the easiest to understand. But she's none of those things. She's complex. She changes shape. She loops. She goes dark. And she never explains herself. A fringe Greek astronomer once noted, centuries after your time in Egypt, that Venus appeared in Babylonian charts, Mayan codices, Hindu epics, and Egyptian walls. Always the same pattern, always the same bright mystery. History loves a rerun. You wonder, did each culture make the same mistake? Turn a planet into a goddess, a sign, a flame, a whisper? Oh, probably. And maybe it wasn't a mistake. Maybe it was a way of saying, we see you. We don't understand, but we're trying. You sit beside Hiru as the scholar continues sketching planetary alignments. I'll miss the guesses, Hiru says quietly. You nod. The mystery had charm. You both look up. Venus hasn't changed, but something in you has. It's not that you now see a planet instead of a god. It's that you see how a god could be a planet, how a tiny dot of light could shape calendars, inspire offerings, cause full-blown political decisions, and nudge an entire civilization into stargazing obsession. The scholar finally sets his telescope down, looks around and says, "They called her a goddess?" Heru smiles. "Of course." "And believes she brought messages?" "Yes." The scholar shakes his head. "She's just a planet." Heru chuckles. "She still changed everything." And that's the truth. Venus changed everything, not because she was a god or a visitor or a spaceship made of gold and song, but because she made people look up, wonder, chart, dream, and sometimes argue over goat placement in rituals. In the marketplace, Venus no longer inspires mass offerings. The goddess carvings are still there, but they're fading. People now focus on harvests, taxes, family, daily miracles that don't sparkle. Venus is, for most, just a star again. But even now, some still whisper. Last week, a girl in the scribe's quarters swore she heard a tone, faint and clear, while staring at Venus. An echo, maybe. A memory. History likes reruns, Heru says again, stretching his tired legs. But so does the sky. You think about that. Maybe Venus hasn't finished visiting us yet. Maybe she just likes to disappear sometimes so we'll miss her properly. And when she returns, as she always does, we throw her a party, rewrite the scrolls, and convince ourselves we've finally figured her out. Until next time. The air tonight feels different. It isn't colder or heavier or particularly windy. It's just still, like the city itself is holding its breath one final time, waiting for something it can't name. You walk slowly through the temple district, familiar stones underfoot, torches sputtering on their last bit of oil. A cat watches you pass with half a blink, then returns to grooming like you're just another background detail. And there she is. Venus, of course. Not flaring, not flashing, not looping around in a fiery spiral of confusion. She's just there, steady, gentle, comfortably low on the horizon like a candle in a window someone forgot to blow out. You find Heru alone on the rooftop platform. He's not scribbling tonight. No stylus, no scrolls, just hands in his lap, face tilted to the stars, expression unreadable. He doesn't turn as you sit beside him. She's been quiet lately, he says. No curves, no tricks. You nod. Maybe she's resting, Heru chuckles. Or maybe we are. Around you, the city seems unaware of the moment. A few dogs bark in the distance. A woman sings softly to a baby down in one of the courtyards. The Nile murmurs its usual lullaby. But up here, on this flat stretch of stone, you feel like you're sitting in the closing chapter of a story that was never really meant to end. The temple has officially moved on. Venus is still in the records, always will be, but her days as a divine headline are long behind her. The offerings have stopped. The ceremonies have been absorbed into broader festivals. Her loops, now considered seasonal variants, a polite way of saying, we gave up trying to explain it. Even Heru has started referring to her less poetically. She's just another wanderer now, he says, not quite convincingly, but you both know better. The truth is, Venus never needed altars to be powerful. She never needed a name or a song or a crown of incense smoke. She just needed to shine, to disrupt, to throw one civilization, maybe several, off their tidy little plans and remind them how little control they really had. And for that, the gods, or the people who imagined them, wrapped her in meaning, gave her stories, faces, moods. Sometimes she was Hathor, nurturing and bright. Sometimes Sekhmet, burning and severe. Other times she was something stranger, a visitor, a warning, an echo from beyond the stars. Fringe scribes thought her a firebird, a silent signal, even a celestial spy. Historians still argue whether any of it made a difference. But as you sit beneath her steady glow, beside a man who spent his entire life chasing her across papyrus and plaster, you know the answer. She changed them, not through force, not through words, just light. In the centuries that followed, Venus would play her tricks again. To the Greeks, she became Aphrodite's star, glowing with beauty and mischief. The Romans, never subtle, named her outright. Mayan astronomers tracked her to shocking precision, sometimes sacrificing to align with her cycles. Across continents and empires, she remained the same dot in the sky, refracted through different myths, different fears, different eyes. And each time, someone probably looked up and said, she's doing something weird again. You and Heru sit in silence a while longer. Eventually, he says, you know what I'll miss? You tilt your head. The mistakes, you smile. Those were the best parts. He sighs, content. Nothing like a good mystery to keep a priest humble. Below the city sleeps. Venus shines. And high above it all, the old myths hum quietly in the dark, no longer shouted, but not forgotten. The temples will move on. People always do. But the stars, they wait. And now, the temple is empty. The oil lamps have burned down to little stubs, flickering against stone that's still warm from the day. You stretch out on your back, fingers laced behind your head, and let the stars take up the full weight of the sky again. Venus is still there, softly glowing, no longer demanding, no longer misbehaving, just present, just herself. There's a strange comfort in that, knowing that for thousands of years people looked up at this same light with questions they never quite answered. And maybe they didn't need to. Maybe the act of wondering was the point. The stone beneath you is cool now, grounding. The air is slow and easy. Every breath feels just a little heavier, a little softer. Even the night sounds, crickets, a distant splash in the Nile, a sleepy cough from someone 2 rooftops over, feel hushed, like the world itself is drifting off beside you. You close your eyes. You can still see Venus behind your lids, a faint shimmer, an echo of her brightness. She doesn't need a name tonight, or a myth, or a shrine, just a place in the sky and a quiet moment to remember her by. Let your breath deepen. Let the edges of thought blur. The stories will wait. The stars will still be there tomorrow. But for now, let it all fall away. The charts, the scrolls, the endless guessing. Just stars, just night, just sleep. You're safe, you're home, and somewhere far above, Venus keeps her quiet vigil.